So welcome everybody to our second session on the 60 Caledon development. This being our first session that is interactive and will allow you to actually ask questions about the development. The purpose of today's session is to get a little more granular and to actually present the development concept we're currently working with, which we have heard from members of the community that's what they're interested in, that's what they want to see, and see what the current plans are. So the session format will be, if you look at your control panel, there's a Q&A function. The Q&A function will allow you throughout the presentation to type in any questions that come up. You don't have to save them for the end. You can type them in as they come up for you. We don't have anyone monitoring the Q&A while we're going through the slide deck. So what we'll do is at the end of the slide deck, I will be sort of aggregating those questions and going through them to put to our panelists, Lauriane Gagne and Brian Sibley, who I'll introduce in just a moment. If you're looking for information about, if you missed our last session and you're looking information regarding how Caledon Community Collaborative came to be and to own the land and the process through the city for making this land available for the development of affordable housing, we went over that in some depth in our previous session, which you can find at our website. It's recorded and the slide deck is there. So I welcome you or encourage you to take a look at that if you weren't able to make our first session. Okay, so just to recap who we are, who is Caledon Community Collaborative? Caledon Community Collaborative is a partnership, is the development partnership of Hamilton East Kiwanis Nonprofit Homes and Victoria Park Community Homes. Both these organizations are nonprofit affordable housing providers with deep roots in Hamilton, so headquartered in Hamilton and have a long history in Hamilton and surrounding areas. So together, Hamilton East Kiwanis and Victoria Park serve around 3,000 households, and the two organizations have a long history of collaboration. So as this partnership is a natural extension of that history of collaboration and came together as a response for the city's call for the development of affordable housing on 60 Caledon. To that end, our panelists today who will be answering your questions are Lauriane Gagne. Lauriane Gagne is the Chief Executive Officer of Victoria Park Community Homes and President of the Caledon Community Collaborative. So Lauriane, if you want to give a little wave, hello. And also Brian Sibley. Brian Sibley is the Executive Director of Hamilton East Kiwanis Nonprofit Homes and the Vice President of the Caledon Community Collaborative. So questions are going to be directed to them at the end. Oh, thanks for waving for us, Brian. And you'll get a chance to hear from them directly. Okay, so just a summary of timeline where we're at, where we've come since our last meeting. We have now completed the formal consultation session with the city about our initial design concepts and have taken that feedback and incorporated it into the design concept that we'll be presenting to you today. We anticipate we're targeting about early May right now for the submission of the zoning bylaw amendment application for the site. The site is currently zoned as community institutional and we'll be looking for an amendment to multi-unit residential. Spring, summer, more likely summer, we'll be looking at the demolition of the school. And the statutory public meeting regarding the zoning bylaw amendment is targeted for fall with council meeting, council vote soon thereafter. Site plan amendment, site plan application and detailed design development. So when we really get into the granular, We're looking at about spring, summer 2022 with construction start in fall 2022. And we expect residents to start occupying in fall 2024. So development concept, which is, I imagine, what most of you are here to see today. So here is the current development concept. So you'll see that there are 2 apartment buildings proposed on the site that are recessed with a height of up to 8 stories, with the 8 stories being recessed to the interior and back of the site. You'll see that there are step backs in those buildings, so starting 3, 6, up to 8 stories from Caledon. You'll also see that there's ample green space in the center of the site, and that we're looking at townhouses, back-to-back townhouses, fronting along Tyrone and Caledon Avenue. So just for you to understand what sort of iterations we've been through to this point, coming out of formal consultation process with the city, we were given feedback from planning and other departments, and we incorporated that feedback into what you're seeing today. Our initial concept included a density or a height of up to 10 stories, and we've reduced that down to 8. The back-to-back townhouses along what you'll see is termed back-to-back townhouses E came along and connected to apartment building B. The feedback we received and incorporated was that cut off the green space from the community. And we really want to achieve a green space that is inviting. So we created a green corridor that invites the community in from along Caledon. Thirdly, of the major sort of reconfigurations that we looked at was the townhouse design. Townhouse design initially was looking at stacked townhouses. The feedback received was about matching current streetscape and context. So minimizing really the number of driveways and entryways along Caledon and Tyrone Road to match the current context. So stemming from that, we redesigned the townhouses so they are now back to back. So the overall number of units that we're currently looking is anywhere between 280 and 300 units. And we'll have an opportunity to get into the more of the details of this. And sorry, as we get to questions, I can come back to this if it's helpful to have the visual up while we're having the discussion. Okay, so some of the constraints we were working with as we came up with this design concept. So first of all, there's a minimal density requirement for viability and also viability of affordable housing. This land was made available by the city for the purposes of developing affordable housing, and we're required to deliver on that. And an element of density is necessary for that viability. Another constraint is that we looked at very early on. We ruled out underground parking as an option for this site. If you're familiar with the site as it currently is, there's a pretty drastic grade and elevation change throughout that site. So that's another challenge that we're working with in this design and designing around it to make use of that elevation change. And finally, good planning principles. So that includes good planning principles are informed by provincial and municipal policy and include residential intensification, which is a policy objective set by the province, which is to reduce urban sprawl and instead increase density and intensify in existing residential areas, to contribute to complete and vibrant communities, which includes providing a range of housing types, and also the making available of urban amenity space and having an animated streetscape. So for us, that really comes through in looking at the programming and green space that we offer, we intend to offer to the community. So key design considerations, the first being a cohesive streetscape. So a design which matches the look and feel of the current context. We heard loud and clear that the green space is important to this community. The green space that's there now is devoid of any programming, so we are actually looking to enhance that space for the community. Safety is a key consideration. Sustainability, both from a financial and environmental perspective, accessibility, and finally, age-friendly. So making sure that our units allow our residents to age in place. So now we get to community consultation, and our intention starting today, but going forward in the next couple of sessions, is we wanted to engage this community early on. We want to hear from you, address your concerns, and incorporate suggestions where we can. We're starting this consultation process much earlier on than is required under the statutory requirements, which I pointed to earlier in the timeline, which would happen much later on. So the kinds of things we want to hear from you and your neighbors about is what successful intensification looks like to you. Knowing that we're developing in a policy context that incentivizes and requires actually intensification, what does that look like to you when it's well done? How do you use the green space now? We know that the green space gets used, and we want to hear how you're using that, so we may be able to preserve some of those uses as we plan for our future green space. What kind of programs and amenities would you like to see in the green space? We want to hear from you what your main concerns and fears are about this development. We know that developments often come with a sense of fear or concern. We know that change is difficult for communities. If you were at our last session, you'll know that Victoria Park has a development, a long-standing development just across the street from here. So we're already your neighbors, and we want to continue that relationship, that neighborly relationship of being good neighbors. And that means hearing your concerns and your fears, and giving us an opportunity to either address them or hear or otherwise incorporate them into our designs. And lastly, we want to hear what you like most about this development. What are the features that are really speak to you? So the way that we're asking for your feedback at this point, beyond the questions that you pose or concerns you're posing today, is that you go to our website, caledoncc.ca, and go to the Contact Us tab, and send us the answers to these questions or other feedback you'd like to give. From there, what we plan to do is compile those responses, concerns, questions, and take them back to the community at our next webinar and address them in a frequently asked questions page. So please do share this widely with your friends, your neighbors in the community. We want to reach as many people as we can. And our promise to you coming out of this is that we will collect this feedback and we will present it, what we've heard, and how we intend to incorporate that into how and what we're intending to incorporate of the feedback we've received. So now we'll move to our panelist discussion. So I'll go through the questions. I'll ask Lorianne and Brian to take themselves off of mute. Hello, hello.
Hi there.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And I should note, Lauren, that I clicked on one question as it was being typed in, and it now says it's answered. So you'll have to go to the answered column to know that it's really not.
Okay, so I'll start with that one, actually. So our first question is whether is whether the development is going to be townhouse or apartment style. I will turn that one over to Lorianne, and then while you're speaking, Lorianne, I'm going to go back to the site plan layout so people can look at it as we're having these discussions.
Beautiful, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. So as Lauren goes back, you will see that it's actually going to be a combination of townhouses and the 2 apartment buildings. Want to point out that, and I know Lauren did mention it, we were very conscious of the streetscape appearance and how it may affect our neighbors. So we were very conscious in putting the apartment buildings back, sort of inside the site, and not necessarily along the streetscape or where your homes may be.
Okay. Thanks, Lorianne. The second question, I think I can answer that, is where the green space is going to be. And we'll see. Lorianne and Brian, can you tell me, can you see my mouse or no? You can. Okay, so the green space is here. So it's a pretty substantial percentage of the site. The actual amenities and whatnot are not shown here because that is part of what we're looking for feedback. The green corridor I was speaking to, which will sort of have a path which leads to the community, people wanting to visit the green space from Caledon into the park, is along here. Oh, sorry. As I referred to, that was a feature that came as a result of our formal consultation with the city. It was incorporating this corridor into the park. Okay. So this question I'll ask to Brian. When are we going to be taking down the school? It said spring, summer, but is it likely May or July or August, etc.?
Yeah, we'd like to take the school down today. We're working on getting the necessary hookups taken care of there. I think the goal is to start in April. We've got our contractor who's going to be doing the demolition, the remediation of the site. So we're hoping that'll be April, May, June when the school will be coming down.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. Brian, I'll also put this question to you. The city required as part of its conditional sale offering for 30 units to be rent geared to income or actually affordable. How many of the 300 units will be affordable?
Okay, so we can start to get into talking about what's geared to income, what's affordable, things like that. And I don't. This is a mixed income community. And when you say a mixed income community, that means that that's a range of incomes coming into this community. What we're focusing on is that this needs to be a financially sustainable community. So there has to be a range of rents. Our role as a service organization in Hamilton is not to run condo corps. Our role is to provide housing for people who need housing. Some of that housing is deeply affordable. Some of it is not deeply affordable. So there's a full range here. What we've said is that about 30 of the units will be at the 80%. Lauren, you correct me if I'm wrong here. I think there was 30 of the units were going to be at the 80% of the average market rent, and then the rents would go up from there, up to a maximum of about 125 of average market rent. When you're talking about the rents that we're charging, you're not talking about the rent isn't the sole dynamic. It's the funding attached to those rents, whether there's rent supplements attached, where the people are coming from into these units. So, what we're trying to say is that we intend to house people who require housing, who are encountering some kind of housing insecurity. That housing insecurity will be for people that some of them will require deep affordability, some of them will be working and be earning up to $80,000 a year, right? But that the current rents are too high. It's a mixed income community, and what we're focusing on here is to make sure that there's financial sustainability, right? There is no point in us putting 100% deeply affordable people into this mixed income community if it is not financially sustainable. It just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, and we're not intending to do that. What we are intending on doing, though, is making sure that the housing is provided to people who need housing.
Great. Thanks for that, Brian. Lorianne, the next question I'll put to you, which is just an explanation of the blue building here, so apartment building C, what's behind it. So if you could speak to the school behind it.
Right, in behind the school, or in behind that apartment building, my understanding is a school and a church facility. You can see a little bit on the corner of it, little bit residential, but primarily it's the school that's in behind there.
Yeah, and that's Calvin Christian School right behind here. So it's a private Christian school. And I believe actually we have some administrators from the school on participating in this call today. Okay, Lorianne, I'll put this next question to you again. The question is that the green space on the site could be enhanced if there was underground parking. Basically, the less surface parking, the more green space you could preserve. Could you walk us through the rationale for the decision against that?
Absolutely, financial. I can say deep down in my heart of hearts, I'm an environmentalist. I wish it was all green space. Wish we could put all of that parking underground and make it all green space. Unfortunately, underground parking is extraordinarily expensive to develop and just out of the range of our two nonprofit organizations. As we mentioned, we're not in the business to do condo developments that'll have high-end sales where we can recuperate those funds. So it's a matter of getting best value for the dollar.
Great, thank you for that. The next question I think is probably best if we connect outside of this. It's from Ruby, asking her first home is the first on Tyrone, and she's wondering what will be right next to it, whether it's the blue building or the townhouses. I think, Ruby, it's hard for me to tell from your question where you are on this. So I'll connect with you afterwards, and then you can perhaps send me your address, and I can then pinpoint to you where, orient you on this map, so you'll be able to see like what you would be facing from your property. Okay, the next question is, I'll put to you, Brian, is this. It appears that there is a drive, so I think the road that circles the property, so the road that goes through the property, which seems like it could become a safety concern with cars driving through faster than they should. What consideration was given to creating separate parking lots with no drive-through possibility? That could also improve safety and green path access. So I guess if I'm understanding the question, is we have sort of the road that encircles the building here doesn't have any interruptions, and was there and is there a concern, and how are we thinking about safety on those roads?
Yeah, I think there's two issues here. One was the design of why the space goes right around the road goes around the buildings, and the second would be issues of traffic calming. And I think they're two separate issues, right? So let's just talk about the design feature first. the design feature is really about access and safety of the complex there, and to prevent, you don't want to have a complex of this size that doesn't have multiple entrances to it. And so it also, we want to make sure there's access for, emergency response teams, for fire safety, all sorts of stuff like that. So the way that it's laid out is a way that limits access in one spot to Caledon Avenue, and it provides a better traffic flow. That's the one thing. It also means that that road services all the buildings, okay, that are interior of the lot. So that's one of the reasons for it. In terms of traffic calming, yeah, we do that routinely at our complexes. You just have to calm the traffic, and that means you're going to have speed humps, and you're going to have posted signs, and you're going to have, things like that to ensure that traffic is slowed down. The positive part about this is that it's meant to remove traffic and allow access to the building without, creating more movement along Caledon and Tyrone. You'll see that there's no access, I believe, from Tyrone into this site. So.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. And the last question that we have, unless others sort of flow in while we're doing this, is I'll put to Lorianne, and is about the green space. Will it be open to everyone in the area, or just people living in the complex?
Great question, and absolutely open to everyone. I'd like to issue a little bit of a caution here. This is the first time you're seeing the concept, and it's a preliminary concept, so we really appreciate the comments and the questions that we're getting. Preliminary in that there may be further negotiations with the city. This was not our first concept. The city, and through knowing the community, already gave us some feedback. Lauren mentioned making sure that our green space was open to the public through a Caledon corridor. That was made clear to us, so we had to go back and make some changes. I just don't want everybody thinking this is the final. It may be, but it may not be. There may be changes. The green space is intended to be open to the community, hence that opening along Caledon Avenue. And we have looked at a couple of concepts for that green space, including a beautiful walking trail that has shade structures, seating areas, a tree canopy, those kinds of things. We didn't want to present it at this particular meeting because we'd like to hear from you. You'll remember on one of the slides, Lauren said, please give us your feedback. Go to our website and tell us things like, how are you using the green space now? What would you like to see? Those kinds of things. We really, really do want to hear your input. And we can't promise the world. Brian has mentioned it needs to be a financially viable development, but we want to incorporate as much as we can, and that is feasible. So, long answer to say, yes, the green space will be open to everyone in the area, and to add that as much as we possibly can, we want to make it very user-friendly for the community. So go to our website, give us some input.
Great. The next question, I'll offer an answer and then ask for Lorianne and Brian to jump in. The south section of the property is natural and has acted as the Yeovil stormwater management area. Where is the storm management in this plan? So, of course, that's a consideration. We wouldn't be able to proceed without this development, without having a management plan, a grading plan, etc. What we're looking at here is a massing concept, and for the purposes of demonstrating generally the site layout, site concept. The actual management plan, we're too early on in the process for that, though we've started working with the consultants on that, and that is something that will be a requirement when you get to site plan application. So it's a little early for us to be showing you a storm management plan, but rest assured, we absolutely will have one, which addresses exactly that. We're aware of the lower part of the site acting as a drainage point for much of the surrounding community. We're aware of that. And Lorianne, Brian, I'm not sure, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think it's a great question, okay? And the reason why I think it's a great question is because I think it refers to a larger part that we haven't really, of this whole development that we haven't talked about yet. You know, when we talk about sustainability, it's easy to talk about the financial sustainability, and that's a big part of this. You know, you've got to, the development has to pay for itself. That's the one side. But the other thing that we haven't really talked about is that we need to have this as an environmentally sustainable community, right? And if it's not going to be an environmentally sustainable community, we don't want any part of it, right? That's sort of the reality. And so that means that you know, things like stormwater management, especially with climate change, those are big issues that need to be addressed. And if they're not addressing it, this makes this complex not financially or environmentally sustainable. So it's an important area that we're working on. We're making these buildings super low and high performance buildings. So that means low on greenhouse gas emissions, low on energy consumption. We're looking at, I mean, all those kind of things for sustainability. If we can make it net zero, that would be great. It's difficult to do that, but we're exploring all those options. So I think that the question about stormwater management is important, but it's within the context of the large environmental sustainability plan for this. Last thing I want to say is that there's also a social sustainability component to this, that this complex needs to meet the needs of the people that live there, but it also needs to meet the needs of the larger neighborhood. You know, we don't want to be putting a square peg in a round hole here. So if it's not meeting the needs of the people that live there, that's a problem in terms of sustainability, right? If we're looking at families that live in the area, we need to have the amenities that support families. If we're looking at people to age in place, we need to have amenities that support that. So it's a very complex question that we often focus on the dollars when it's much greater than that in terms of sustainability.
Thanks, Brian. That's an important context. And I'll also sort of just refer you back to our previous session when we talked about, at the information session, the various kinds of sustainability that we're looking at, being social, financial, environmental. The next question I'll pose to Lorianne. The question is, has this plan been approved by the city yet? And I think the question is, perhaps, has this been submitted for the zoning bylaw amendment application, and has the city given the thumbs up on it?
Not yet. As I mentioned, it's very preliminary. We had initial discussions, which Lauren had crossed off on a sort of our timeline, where we got some initial feedback from the city. We made some adjustments. And have now been undertaking a number of the studies that are required to accompany the next set of preliminary concept drawings with our zoning bylaw amendment application. And we're hoping that will go in, I believe, early May is the time frame. And that's where I was saying we may get additional feedback from the city where we have to change these again.
That's right. And for clarification on the process, at the zoning bylaw amendment phase, you're not getting approval for the site plan. That comes later on when you do a much deeper dive, and there's a lot of conditions that come as for approval of a site plan, which include things like a stormwater management plan. So you end up getting feedback from the city that says, you need to have all of these things and demonstrate that they've been dealt with for your site plan, which will be a lot more detailed than this. And that we expect to be approximately fall, winter of, well, about a year from, or less than a year from now, but about. Okay, Brian, I'm going to direct this question to you about parking. What is the parking to unit ratio? We have concerns about an increase in on-street parking causing blind spots and safety concerns for children in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and we're actually doing some traffic studies on this right now to really understand where we're at. I mean, our preference is to have the parking here that is needed to support the complex. Okay, whether that's 75% of the units or whether it's higher, we haven't come down firm on what that looks like yet. Partially because we haven't got the full feedback from the city yet on what they will require. So there's a combination of things. What I can tell you is that we operate townhouses and we operate apartment buildings. What we find with townhouses, that townhouses tend to require higher levels of parking in townhouses. So, I mean, you will find in this particular layout, I think that the townhouses are 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 in terms of parking spots on it. Apartment buildings we're running at 50% in terms of spots required per unit. It's just the way they work out. People who live in apartments with 1 bedrooms, things like that. So, we're doing the studies to look at that. That's as firm as I can be right now. Our preference from a financial perspective, the preference is as low as possible, right? Because parking is just wasted space. It takes away from green space, takes away from many things. It also, but there's a reality that you've got to have sufficient parking to service the site or it's not socially sustainable.
You're on mute, Lauren.
Thank you. The next question is about sound, and I'm going to try to answer it, although I think the question may need some clarification. The question is, what type of sound barrier will you be installing where there is existing residential homes? I'm not sure I quite understand what you mean by sound barrier, but I'll say that we're doing a noise study, of course, and that looks at how our design can be built to reduce noise from things like Caledon Ave, Tyrone Ave, and also they've identified, for example, noise from HVAC units on the top of some commercial, like the Calvin Christian School, for example. In terms of a sound barrier, I think the question is asking whether this development will increase noise and whether there will be protection of that noise from the homes, from the existing homes. And I think the answer to that is no, there won't be any sort of sound barrier erected. And we don't expect noise to be substantially increased. So I think if there's more to that question that you'd like to clarify, please do. Brian and Lorianne, if you have something to add, please do. Otherwise, I think maybe we'll wait for clarification on that. Okay. Brian, I'm going to throw this question your way. How will the schools in the area accommodate extra students this complex will bring? The Catholic school is over capacity and the public school is very small and needs renovations.
Yeah, I mean, when they're planning on schools and when you're planning on new developments, there is sort of a natural process of discussion between the school boards and the housing in terms of what the needs are to the community. I mean, I can't say that we have an answer to that question right now. There will be an impact on the schools and the school numbers. We'll be paying substantive school tax levies to help support increasing the capacity of schools. But yeah, that's an area that we would need to take a bit of a deeper dive with our school board partners on find out what the plan is. I can't tell you that, but it was something that I'm glad has been brought up because we'll certainly need to circle back and look at it.
Sure. Yeah. And part of the assessment, I'll just make an additional point that this land was school lands and was deemed to be surplus. So the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board initially, of course, owned these lands and had subsequently determined they were surplus and they were purchased from the city. So there has been some thought applied to this at the sort of like city planning level. However, as Brian alluded to, it's certainly something that we're continuing and we'll have to continue to have conversations about. And of course, as developers, we pay fees towards that system, towards the increased burden of development capacity on the existing infrastructure like schools. So I'm seeing that we have been through all of our questions. Nothing further has come in. So to that end, I'm going to move us to the last slide and just talk about next steps. Sorry, just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So as I said before, we really want to get that feedback from you. And now that I think about it, we'll include the list of questions on our webpage so we can help sort of direct, so you can have a refresher on what questions we're asking and we're hoping to hear from you about. You can do that in two ways. One, you can visit us at caledoncc.ca and submit it directly through there, or you can email us directly at contact@caledoncc.ca. Our commitment to you is to compile that feedback and to present it at the next community meeting, to prepare for questions that come up pretty frequently. We see things like, dust management during construction and whatnot. We will create an FAQ, a frequently asked questions page, and have it on our website. And our next webinar is April 29th, 2021. And we hope that you'll join us. Okay, so hold on. I do have one more question that I'm going to put to you, and then we'll conclude. So I'll put this to Brian and Lorianne, feel free to both jump in. Is the property was purchased under a municipal facilities agreement with the city. Isn't the development exempt from development charges?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this first. So the answer to Mr. Broadbent's question is yes and no. So there's as long as we provide for the units that we provide at what's been listed as affordable rent, development charge waivers can apply. Okay, I'm not sure that it actually has been passed yet for this, but it can apply. Any unit that does not meet the definition of affordability, the DC waivers won't apply for those units, right? Now, when we're talking about developmental charge waivers, we're not talking about school board fees, and we're not talking about parkland levy fees, although we're putting a park in here, so there might be some impact on that. So when I say yes, for those units that are considered affordable, deemed affordable by the city's definition of affordability, we can potentially receive DC waivers. If there are any units that aren't, they wouldn't receive DC waivers. I can't speak for everybody on the team. My preference is that they're all affordable, but that doesn't mean that makes the complex, fully sustainable. So we're still working through that yet. We haven't got a firm design. We've got a conceptual design, so we haven't been able to work out the full numbers in terms of what works. Lorianne?
I think you summed it up well. I have nothing to add.
Okay. And then the last, I'll make this our last question. Then if there are further questions, please do send them to either through the website or at the contact. But this is clarifying from the earlier question about, I think, sound. So Lorianne, what type of fencing will be erected between existing residential homes and the site? So I don't know if the question is sort of if they're envisioning a sort of fencing around or if we're talking about one side, but could you speak to whether there will be that kind of fencing?
Again, it's very early, and I can say that at this point, we haven't discussed fencing around the site. again, I wade into sort of personal preferences here without talking to the whole team, as Brian just said. But we don't want to isolate this development from the community. We want it to be an added value to the community as a whole. So our intent is not to, erect 20-foot walls all around it and keep it segregated. It's to open it up to the community, hence the enhanced green space, where we don't want fencing or walls prohibiting the community and the neighborhood from accessing that green space. Perhaps if you have serious concerns around a specific area, you can voice those in the contact us. But at this point, we have not looked at specific fencing around any particular section.
Yeah.
Brian, did you want to add?
Yeah. I'm assuming from this question, the area that I can see that would be immediately adjoining the property, aside from Calvin Christian School, is the area directly to the north, where we have a neighborhood that it doesn't actually come off of Caledon, but it adjoins the property. And I think there's currently wooden fences along there right now. And so I can understand that normally, in terms of properties where their backyards adjoin our property, we normally have fencing there. It would be an interesting discussion to have with those particular neighbors. I'm not sure how many neighbors would actually be along there, but let's say there's 15 or 20 that are along there, that their properties actually adjoin ours. That's a good group for a discussion on that. I think there's an opportunity there to discuss what that fencing should look like.
Great. So that takes us to the end of our session today. If you have further questions, again, please do reach out to us, send us your feedback, your concerns, and we'll certainly compile it and we'll circle back. So on behalf of Caledon Community Collaborative and Victoria Park and Hamilton Kiwanis, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us here today and to engage with us meaningfully, ask good questions. They were good questions, and we're hoping for more of this. So thanks very much, and do take care, and welcome to spring.
Thank you very much for participating. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye now, everyone.